Cool. Well. Program. This is the Missoula Creation Forum, and it's going to be a live call-in program. Our guest this evening with us tonight is Dennis Wilson, and he's going to be answering your questions or comments that you might have if you call in. And the number is going to be on your screen throughout the program, or on and off throughout the program. The number is 542-MCAT. And so anytime, just give us a call if you have a question or a comment. To begin with, Dennis is going to give us some opening remarks, or had some things he wanted to tell us, some of his ideas. So I'll let Dennis have the floor here.
Well, thanks, Jim. This is a book that is used by the University of Montana. It's called The Morphogenesis of the Vertebrates. And it is a discussion cover to cover of how all living things came to be. And I'd just like to share a little bit from this book that is used by the University of Montana tonight. It's a discussion by a leading German evolutionist of his day, Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel brought us the very well-known aphorism, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Now that sounds very, very highbrow. The words are very complicated. But ontogeny simply means the development that takes place inside the womb. The phylogeny part of it simply speaks about the life history of the family tree of an organism. So when we say ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, all we're saying is that all the steps of evolution take place within the womb. And from the single cell to, say, man, ontogeny supposedly recapitulates phylogeny. That is that inside the womb, a child goes through all the steps of evolution. Well, is this true? Reading from this book from the university, we read this. And we'll let the camera focus on that right there. It is difficult to identify the first germ of the idea, for it appears in the writings of several biologists from 1821 onward. But in 1891, Ernst Haeckel, the German morphologist, proposed a marriage between ontogeny and phylogeny that was to affect profoundly the interpretation of developmental anatomy. Haeckel argued for what he called the principle of recapitulation, according to which the successive stages of individual development correspond with successive adult ancestors in the line of evolutionary descent. So, in the womb, we see first the fish stage, then the amphibian, then the reptile, and then the mammal. Now, anyone knowing today's sociological debate would immediately see that this is one of the bases for such things as abortion. But is it true? You know that every doctor and every attorney and every judge and every reporter of the news in our country has been taught this aphorism. And they've seen the pictures in textbooks such as this one. But the problem is, it's not true. Closer scrutiny would reveal that the likenesses between embryo man and adult fish are superficial. As development proceeds, the embryos of these different animals become more and more dissimilar. Reptiles, birds, and mammals never produce anything akin to the gills of an adult fish. And so it goes into the amphibian stage and the reptile stage and the mammal stage. There is no correspondence between evolution and the development of the embryo in the womb. And I just say that to set the stage this evening to show that the creationist argument is one that is well thought through, and it's not just based upon emotions and no facts.
Well, thanks. I can see you not only thought through these particular arguments here, but you obviously have a pretty strong background in some of these areas. Tell me a little bit about your background, how you came to some of your creationist viewpoints that you have.
Well, Jim, I was raised in a very scientific family. My father is a geologist. And to this day, some of the things I believe, he disagrees with me. But we have a friendly debate, and we enjoy one another as we debate. And that's part of the idea of science, that two ideas clash, and they debate and they struggle with one another until one idea gains the floor and gains the day. But I was attending the University of Montana, studying from books such as this one I've just shown you. And it became increasingly clear to me that some of the things that they were telling me were based upon rather storytelling rather than facts. Over and over again they would say, well, there is no real evidence for this, but we believe this. I remember one particular class in which the instructor was trying to tell us about the origin of the tooth. And I know about teeth. Teeth are apatite rock. They're actually a mineral. And to think that such a thing could happen by accident was very confusing to me. And what the instructor told me was that, first of all, you had a single cusp tooth, just 1 point, and then you had a bicusp tooth, 2 points, and somehow they merged together. Now, there was really no genetic reason for this, and I began to ask the instructor questions, and he couldn't give me good answers. Eventually, I began to study on my own, and I learned from the books of the creation scientists that all was not well in the area of evolution creationism, and I became a creationist, not on the basis of religion, but on the basis of facts of science.
Can you give me an example of perhaps another one of those facts that really helped draw you to that point?
Well, I will
What are some other evolutionist facts that have some big holes in them?
Well, it's hard to begin because there are so many. But let's begin at the beginning, at the origin of life. In the tales that are told in school, and I believe they are tales, one Russian scientist by the name of Oparin years ago postulated that the atmosphere of the Earth must be what is called a reducing atmosphere. Now, the reason it must be a reducing atmosphere is because in a reducing atmosphere you have no oxygen, and you have methane and ammonia and all of the gases that are not oxidizing type of chemicals. You need this because organic molecules, things like DNA and RNA and protein molecules, in the presence of oxygen, the oxygen oxidizes them and they become a mush. They're useless for biology. And so Oparin postulated this. Now, this is a big problem right at the beginning, of course, because in a reducing atmosphere, you have no ozone shield, no oxygen O3 shield over the surface of the planet. So therefore, when the little critters supposedly had evolved at the beginning, when it tried to come up to begin photosynthesis or however else it would metabolize its first food, the hard ultraviolet coming into the planet would kill it immediately. So you're on the horns of a dilemma already. And there are many other questions related to the origin of life. We could go on for the next year on just this question. One of the biggest problems that the creationists versus the evolutionists have in the origin of life problem is the problem of racemization. When a chemist goes into his lab and he makes up a bunch of organic molecules, he finds out that half of them are right-handed and half of them are left-handed. And even though the molecules are absolutely the same chemically, they're very different biologically. Now, though it may not seem like much to think in terms of left and right-handedness to those of us who are not chemists, but to the living organism, it's very important. All things in life have left-handed organic molecules, left-handed carbons in sugars, proteins, and all of the other molecules that make up the living things. Now, it's very interesting. That's true in all of the higher animals, but in the bacteria, for some reason, they all have right-handed carbons. And so therefore, you know, when the evolutionist tries to say that single-celled things became multiple-celled things, well, how did this change? How did it change from the right to the left? And how did this begin in an absolutely chance situation? How did we get just one or the other? We would have gotten an even mixture, 50-50, because in our test tubes there is no difference. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult for an organic chemist to separate those two.
Before I ask Dennis another question here that I had, if you have a question or a comment for Dennis, make sure you give us a call here. Like I say, it's a live program. We're ready to take your calls. But let's go from bacteria and some of the smaller organisms to a creature that seems to be pretty popular nowadays, dinosaurs. What happened to the dinosaurs? Do you really think that a dinosaur existed at the same time as man walked the earth? Is there any evidence that dinosaurs and man coexisted?
Well, that's a very good question, Jim. Yes, indeed, I do believe that the dinosaur and the human coexisted. Now, one of the best evidences for this is the footprints that exist in Biloxi, Texas. Now, some evolutionists that are very savvy to some of these things will immediately jump up from in their front of their TV and they'll say, "Ah, but that's been disproven." Well, it is true that some of the footprints, and they find both dinosaur and human footprints in Biloxi River, Texas, some of those have been shown to be carved by men, have put in, taken tools and carved out the structures. But it's very difficult to duplicate one of the sources of evidence of Biloxi at least, because on film, the scientists actually dug on the side of the riverbank, unloading tons of rock from a strata, which they had covered. The tons of rock had covered this strata, and they followed the footprints of dinosaur and human far back into the rock strata. And that's very difficult to duplicate. And besides that, Jim, it may be a surprise to some evolutionists, but Biloxi River is not the only place in the world where you find human and dinosaur tracks together. In fact, there are many places otherwise in the States. Arizona and Texas and other places have those kinds of situations. So yes, I do believe that.
And did these dinosaurs, well, can you give me a time frame in which the dinosaurs would have become extinct in your view then? Or,
well,
I mean, obviously
being a creationist, I do believe in Noah's flood. I believe that in all the parts of the earth, wherever you go, the highest mountains, you have examples of marine life. You know, some people say that coal mines were formed by millions of years of materials in forests laid down in swamps, in sphagnum swamps. And that material accumulated over the millions and millions of years, mostly in the Carboniferous period, some what they call 300 to 250 million years ago, the Mississippian and the Carboniferous period. And they say that these great swamps accumulated materials. Well, we know that's not true. That wherever you go in the world and you dig a core into coal, into sphagnum swamps today, you might find some lignite coal, some very rudimentary coal forming. But you won't find any real deep coal deposits, any real anthracite and bituminous coals. And inside this material, you will also find marine fossils. Now, marine fossils are fossils from the oceans. Things like belemnites and things like squids and objects like that. Now, how did that get into that coal mine? The only answer is the creationist answer, and that is that the coal formations did not form by swamps laying down slowly, but during the flood, great mats of all the forests of the earth at that time accumulated in specific places in our continent on the east side of the United States, primarily, and form masses of coal that are so massive that it would take forests literally billions of years to accumulate the amount of coal that's there. And how did the marine fossils get into that coal? So I would say that's good evidence that there was in fact a worldwide flood. If there was a worldwide flood, there was a tremendous change in the atmosphere conditions, And we would expect that that would kill the dinosaurs.
All right, if some of you are watching perhaps and maybe have some questions or you're saying, oh, that sounds a little fishy to me, make sure you feel free to call us at 542-MCAT, and I guess we have a call right now. So we'll put you on the air. Welcome to our show this evening. Do you have a question for Dennis or a comment?
What is the controversy with the Grand Canyon? As I understand it, the evolutionists claim the strata there indicates millions of years. And what is the creationist position on that, or how is that addressed?
Well, that's a very good question. In my own youth, I've spent some time at the Grand Canyon, and in fact, the traditionalist view of the Grand Canyon, if you go there today, they will tell you that the Colorado River, little by little, over millions of years, dug down the Grand Canyon as the Colorado upwarp, the uplift in that area, began slowly lifting up. The waters ate down as the material around it lifted up. But you all know, anyone knows that has done the least bit of experimenting with water, is that water seeks the lowest place. And the natural way for water, for the Colorado River to run, in this case, is down southward through the Painted Desert and out into the Gulf of Mexico, not into the Gulf of California through an upwarp, an uplift. It doesn't make any sense. And even the park people admit this today. So, what do we say about this? Well, we also say this. When we look at the Grand Canyon, we see layers that are flat. And we do not see soil between those layers, indicating a great deal of time for those layers to have formed. We see, in fact, no soil profiles at all between what should be millions of years of strata. And so we ask ourselves, how could such a thing be? The creationist explanation is this. It's very similar to the explanation that produced the great escarpment out to the west of here from Glacier Lake, Missoula. In fact, the canyons and the scablands that formed going over Idaho, and Washington were formed because Glacier Lake, Missoula had a dam that burst and sent water shooting out. We believe that the Grand Canyon was the same. It had a tremendous lake that formed out in the Four Corners area of Utah, Colorado, and Arizona right after the flood, when the sediments were not well in place. The dam broke, or maybe it did several times, and the waters ran out with great velocity, taking with it all of that sediment that is the Grand Canyon today. And the fact is, there's no erosion in the Grand Canyon today. There's a material that covers the walls. The red wall limestone is not red at all. It's a material that covers it. There is so little erosion that fine material covering the walls is not eroded by rainfall. So there's no erosion taking place today. There wasn't before.
All right,
Guess
thanks,
we have a
Dennis.
call.
I guess we have another call here. Hi, welcome to the program.
Hi, my name is Mike, and my question pertains to the gap theory. I'm assuming that you're familiar with the gap theory. I am not a gapper, as we're called, and I was wondering what is your position?
Well, the gap theory, for those who do not know what it is the idea that between Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and Genesis 1:2, which says something to the effect that and the earth was void, that is, it was empty. And between those two verses, some of the early creationists felt that they needed to place all the geologic years, because they were a little bit frightened, frankly, of the data that the paleontologists and the scientists were coming up with. And so they began to try to work around that and still keep their Bible. But the problem is that in Exodus chapter 20, in the same part of the Bible that the Lord gave us the Ten Commandments, it says that He made it all things that are in 7 days, the heavens and the earth. And so that's hard to reconcile with a gap. And so I am a strict 7-day creationist. I believe that just as the Bible says, that God made all that is in 7 days. And I believe it can be very well shown from the scientific side as well as the Bible side.
One of the things we have discussed here several times now is the time frame thing. Obviously the evolutionists seem to place a time frame of several million to several billion years, perhaps, and creationists seem to have a time frame, as you said, of 5 to 10,000 years.
Right.
One of my questions is, just when I look at the stars and we know what the speed of light is, and we know that how long it would take for light to come from some of those stars, how do you explain a age of the Earth, say, at 7,000 years? That's something, or maybe you want to give us an age of the Earth that you...
I am, Jim, over the years I've become more and more comfortable with Bishop Ussher's 4004 BC. And I'm perfectly willing to live with that. Now, you asked a very good question, and one I'm sure that many people have thought about. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second, of course, and given the distances to some of these stars, it would take many, many years. To the nearest star, something like 500 years to even reach here, the light from that area. So how does the creationist get through that? Well, the first thing we say is that this is one of our biggest problems, but we're willing to accept this. The Bible says, of course, that the light was created before the light-bearing object, so therefore it may well have been created in progress of coming to us. But we have good evidence that the Earth is very young, no matter how we explain the star problem. For example, the issue of the helium in the atmosphere. As you may know, helium is an inert element, the second element in the periodic table. And it is composed of basically what we call an alpha particle, a neutron, a proton, and a neutron and a proton, 4 of them together. And in the process of radioactivity, uranium releases these alpha particles. And we only have enough alpha in our atmosphere to account for 17,000 years. Now, people might say, well, it's a light element. It's probably puffing out into space. But Melvin Cook in Nature magazine proved that, in fact, there is a net influx of helium into our atmosphere. And helium is inert, so it doesn't combine with anything else. The original helium is still there in the atmosphere and can only be accounted for in 17,000 years, max. I think we have a call.
I guess we got another call here. Hi, thanks for calling. What's your question?
This is Mike calling again. I called a few minutes ago. I'm really enjoying your explanation, and I just tuned into the program. My son was watching it, and called me into the room here. Do you, in your explanation, when you deal with evolutionists, do you point out the fact that when creation was just split seconds old, as it were, it was created with the appearance of age? In other words, the trees were fully mature, so that they would appear to be, hundreds of years old, yet they were not. And everything was created mature. I was wondering if you pointed such things out.
Well, no, we haven't, Mike, and actually you've done a good job of it. Adam and Eve were, according to the biblical account, were not created as children, they were created as adults. The question arises, did they have a navel? And the answer, in my mind, is I don't know. And I think that that's what the Bible says.
Okay. One more thing. Is it true that they can measure entropy, the rate at which our energy is being changed from a state of usefulness to uselessness? Is it true that they can actually measure it so that they can calculate, the rate that it's being used? And if you reverse that, so that you would go back in time, is this perhaps why they come up with a point of origin such as the Big Bang Theory? In other words, they realize that if everything is being... I use the example of filling up your gas tank. So you fill up your gas tank in your car on Monday, and by the end of the week, of course, it's on E. And then if you backtrack, you use so many gallons per day. Okay, so that the point of origin was a full tank, as it were. Okay, and I'm wondering, can they measure this And so is that why they come up with, theories such as the Big Bang Theory, because they realized there was a point of origin?
Well, actually, not. Entropy, of course, is a measure of the chaos of the universe, and all things are tending towards disorder. Everything that we have in the world is running down. Our bodies are wearing out. We're growing old. Our cars are breaking down. Our rooms, if we leave them to themselves, they will not make themselves. They will become increasingly disorderly. And of course, the creationist uses this argument very strongly against the evolutionist. The evolutionist is constantly telling us that there is a principle, some kind of a function in nature that makes things want to go uphill and accumulate order and accumulate energy. And of course, our bodies, with the 14 trillion cells of our bodies, are the most orderly things in the universe, as far as we know. And so the evolutionist isn't a problem. Everything about the laws of physics tell him that things are running downhill, and yet he has to have a principle in nature that runs uphill. And it doesn't work. And everything we see about nature goes downhill. And whenever we intervene with more energy, things actually increase their entropy.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. Well, I want to enlarge on this, and this is a good question.
I'll take the answer over the air. Thank you.
All right, very good.
Thanks for your call, Mike.
Yeah. Mike, but there are principles in nature that they measure back on. And one of those is the magnetic moment of the Earth. We know for a fact that the magnet of the Earth has been measured for thousands of years. Not with precision. Precision the last several hundred. But extrapolating over that period of 100 years or so, we realize that the curve of which the magnetic moment of the Earth, that is the power of the magnet of the force of the Earth, is decreasing at such a high rate of speed that if we extrapolate back on the curve, we only some 10,000 years into the past, the Earth has to have such an amount of energy to generate that magnet that it becomes a star. And it couldn't possibly be any older than 10,000 years or so because of this problem of the magnetic moment of the Earth eroding.
All right, I know there's a lot of heat often between creationists and evolutionists, and one of the charges that's often leveled at creationists is that for some reason creationists are trying to get religion into schools. Can you defend yourself against that charge? Or?
Yeah, Jim, we sure can. And in fact, it's an unfair charge. It is the best science is, as I said earlier, is when two theories are allowed to compete and both theories are given equal weight. And when you look at all the evidence, because the creationist is looking at the same data as the evolutionist. They're both looking at the same data. It's not the data we disagree with, it's the interpretation of the data. So what creationists ask for is simply this, that in the schools we give equal time to both explanations, not the Bible, but rather the scientific data, and allow the children who are in those schools, we believe with reasonable intelligence, to weigh those things in their minds, getting a better grip on both, getting a better grip on evolution. It's been shown that students that are taught with both the creation and the evolution model understand both much better. And if they are given that chance, 90% will come out with a creationist viewpoint. I just think it's better science, Jim. It's not necessarily anything to do with my religion or your religion, but rather the truth. That's what we're here for, the truth.
All right. If you have about a minute here, if you have a quick call or a quick question for Dennis, feel free to give us a call at 542-MCAT. And Dennis, what is radiometric dating is one of the things that I know there's some controversy about. Is that sort of dating reliable, the radiocarbon dating or radiometric dating?
Okay, there's a distinct difference between radiocarbon dating and radiometrics, other types of radiometrics, such as uranium, lead, and some of these others. And all I can say in the final moments we have here is that the creationist has a very good answer for this. I guess we'll just have to wait to a later program, however, to get into the real details of this. But suffice it to be said that one of the most interesting radiocarbon things I've ever seen is that the Paluxy River with the dinosaur tracks, there was a piece of wood found in that, and that was dated by carbon-14 by evolutionists at something like 10,000 to 15,000 years of age. That may not be well known to most people.
Oh. Well, I think it's been great to have you on the program, Dennis, and we appreciate you being with us this evening.
Thanks, Jim.
Next time we're on, I hope you give us a call again and ask Dennis some questions, and we'll be back sometime with the Missoula Creation Forum.
Good evening and welcome back to another episode of the Missoula Creation Forum. I'm Jeremy Sayer, and I will be asking questions here with the person on my right. This person is a very, very knowledgeable man. He is a creationist, and his name is Dennis Wilson.
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, to begin our program tonight, I'd like to talk a little bit about the early Earth. What you've been told in your science classes is that the Earth was created some 4.5 billion years ago, and it spent a great deal of time in the beginning as a molten state, in a molten state. I would say, as a believer in the Bible, that that's not true. But not just from my Bible, but from my science, I understand it not to be true. There is a very prominent young man in the scientific world called Michael Gentry. Dr. Michael Gentry, who was formerly of the Oak Ridge Labs and the federal laboratories down in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And he made an astounding discovery some years ago, and I'd like to refer to my board over here on this issue. What we have here before us is a schematic of what we call a paleochroic halo. Now, you don't find these in nature this way. This is a schematic that's blown up to 100 times the magnitude that you would find it. What this is a marking in the bedrocks all over the world. Little halos like this are formed in those bedrocks. In the bedrocks of the granites, there are three different kinds of minerals. There are granites, there are hornblendes, and there are micas. And in the micas, you find these halos. What they are remnants of transuranium elements, elements that are heavier in atomic weight than uranium, and so therefore they existed for a very short time upon the Earth. This no longer exists on the Earth, except in cyclotrons and places where physicists play with subatomic particles. However, polonium-214, or 218, once existed. What this is a demonstration of what happens in the rocks when a radioactive material gets into the rock. It begins to disintegrate, and alpha particles come out from this center to the dark spot, leaving kind of a photographic image, or a halo. We can tell that this was polonium-218 because of the amount of energy to produce this particular halo. This existed for only a very short time at the beginning of the creation of the world. Now, if in fact all the polonium disappeared early in the creation of the world, then what is this halo still doing in the rocks? It should have vanished eons ago. If it took millions of years of a molten planet, there should be no markings like this in the bedrocks. And this is why Robert Gentry said that this is one of life's little mysteries. The fact that the earth must have been created solid and cold, not hot, as you've been taught, because of the images of the polonium-218 halos in the bedrocks of the earth.
So not only are you saying that the polonium was there to begin with, or that the earth is young, I should say, but now what?
That it was created
Yeah.
cold, as it says in the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Right.
And it doesn't say that it took millions of years of a molten planet, of a big bang somewhere in the universe, exploding, condensing into interstellar clouds, and then into a nebula that formed planets that were molten and finally hardened into the world that we know it. We're saying that indeed, from the evidence of the rocks, and from hard science, that in fact the earth was created solid and cold.
All right, contrary to evolutionary belief.
Contrary to that.
Now, is that true, Dennis, that we have callers available if it so happens that some people on the air might want to call in?
Yes, indeed.
All righty. So if you're listening here and you would like to make a phone call, why don't you go ahead and just do that? Till then, I'm going to ask a couple questions to Dennis here and
Okay.
get his opinion on some of these issues. Now, Dennis, do you believe that, as a creationist, that the earth, way back, we've been taught that there was a flood. Do you believe that that flood covered the whole earth?
Yes, I do, Jeremy. I believe that the evidence for the flood is worldwide. The first line of evidence for the flood of Noah comes from the traditions of primitive tribes throughout the world. We do have a caller. Let's see what the caller has to say, and we'll continue on that vein afterwards.
Alrighty, we'll do that.
It looks like we don't have a caller. At any rate, the flood traditions demonstrate to us that there was, in fact, wherever we go, a moral failure occurred on the earth. These are from the traditions, the myths, and the stories that are told in the most ancient tales of peoples from Africa, from Australia, from North America, throughout the whole world. And it's always the same ingredients in the story. There was a moral failure that occurred early on, and one man is warned. And that one man is warned that the world will be drowned in water. And always there are animals to be saved. Those ingredients are found everywhere you look by anthropologists in some of the earliest myths and stories throughout the world. This leads me to believe from just that alone that in fact there was a time when the world was covered with water. But there are lots of other good reasons for believing in the flood of Noah as well. The Bible, of course, does teach that a flood occurred, and this was not a tranquil flood. We like to think in terms of our little storybooks that we read, the little round bottom boat with a few giraffe heads stuck out. But that isn't the way it happened at all. What occurred was a cataclysm like the world has never known before or since, and will never receive again until the Lord destroys the earth in fire, it says. But at any rate, huge tidal waves, somehow, some of them 200 feet in height, coursed across the surface of the planet. Massive vulcanization, destroying all the then existing planets, or the life on the planet. Now you might think, well, how in the world did Noah's boat survive this? Well, there were some people at MIT that did a series of studies on a ship the size and shape of Noah in a surge tank. And they discovered that Noah's boat, which was really a barge, it wasn't a circular hulled thing like we always see in the storybooks, that Noah's boat was in fact a big flat slab that could have taken 200 and maybe 300 foot high waves tsunamis coming smashing into the boat and just simply right over the top. Now, this would have created tremendous disturbances over the face of the earth. Any geology that existed at the time would have been wiped out. We know for a fact that on the highest mountain ranges in all the world, we find fossils of marine plants and animals. So therefore, we know that, in fact, there has been water there. Now, some people would say, well, good heavens, how could all those animals get on that boat?
Yeah.
Well, the fact is that the ark was, as we've said before, kind of a sledge affair, or a big block. And it was 45 feet in height and 75 feet wide and 450 feet long. It had 3 decks, so therefore 100,000 square feet of volume inside the ark. Now, this would have left 2 full layers for animals and another whole layer on the top for Noah and his family to live in. We know that the average size of all the land-bearing, all the land animals, is about the size of a sheep. That's about the average. Yeah. Some are bigger, some are smaller. Of course, dinosaurs and things were on this as well. And the dinosaurs probably weren't their full size. You know, we know that reptiles never stop growing. They go from little and they get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Even T-Rex, as big as he is, Tyrannosaurus Rex, starts with an egg about this size.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, at any rate, so they probably took little ones, little dinosaurs on the ark. So the average size must have been around the size of a sheep. Yeah. With that in mind, you could have like 20,000 land species. You don't have to worry about the fish, of course. You don't have to worry too much about the insects and most flying things, because they would land on flotsam on the surface. Yeah. But with that, there would be plenty of room in the ark for all the species that are presently on the earth. So it's not a problem for the creationists. The flood of Noah, we embrace it and we accept it, and we believe that the layers in such places as the Grand Canyon speak of a water deposit, because if you look at the Grand Canyon, you find some discontinuities in the wall of the Grand Canyon, but mostly it's paraconformity, mostly layer upon layer, with no soil profiles in between. No indication that there were millions of years of erosion taking place between those layers. And so therefore, we as creationists say that must have occurred by turbidites, which are underwater movements of great masses of mud and other kinds of sedimentary materials that shot over the surface of vast deep and laid down one on top of another, quickly becoming solidified into rock because of chemical as well as pressure properties in all the muds that were laid down. So therefore, we have no problem at all with Noah's flood, and in fact, we embrace it. We believe that Noah's flood explains most of the geologic evidence that we see today. There are some exceptions, but we don't have time or the inclination to go into all those details tonight.
Okay. Do you believe that there were insects on the ark then?
No, we believe the insects primarily survived by just simply floating on the flotsam on the surface of the water.
Okay.
They're
Yeah,
by the way,
there
were huge mats of forests on the surface of the flood.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that traditional geology has never been able to explain is how massive coal deposits came to be. Mm. Because under the present idea that forest growing on top of a bog which died and decayed into peat and became pressed down and becoming coal, that idea never works for 2 reasons. Number one, when you drill down into a coal bog or into a peat bog, you never get coal. You might find some lignite, some halfway made into coal stuff, but never real coal. And the other problem is that some of these coal beds, like in Europe, go down for 10,000 feet.
Yeah.
And that would have taken literally millions of forests on top of each other to produce that. The only reasonable explanation is that there was a tremendous accumulation in certain areas of vast forests over the face of the earth. We also find marine fossils in the midst of the coal. Do you know what marine fossils are?
Are those fossils that were created in the water? Or
they're in the water, but they're not fresh water.
Okay.
See, peat bogs are always freshwater bogs.
Yeah.
Marine fossils are ocean fossils. So
Oh,
what
okay.
is an ocean fossil doing in a peat bog? No way. It
Yeah.
had to have been formed by massive amounts of water over a vast amount of area, at least the size of an ocean and perhaps the size of Noah's flood, covering all of the world to a depth of several hundred or several feet above the top of the highest mountains, as it says in the book of Genesis.
Okay. Now to switch gears a little bit and change topics, I guess. Is it true that man has produced life in a test tube?
Well, that's a good question, Jeremy. You hear this occasionally. Every now and then somebody will come out with an idea that, yes, man has created life in a test tube. Well, as you might imagine, I have a slide that would deal with that as well. Let's look at that slide. If I can find it here. Here it is.
All righty. Let's have a look.
This is an apparatus that was produced by a very distinguished graduate, actually under the auspices of a very distinguished graduate of the University of Montana by the name of Urey. It's called the Urey-Miller experiment, and it was actually done by Urey's graduate student, Stanley Miller.
Okay.
And he set up a set of glassware with this configuration. This is, again, a schematic. And inside the main vessel, he put in hydrogen, water, methane, and gases like this that he believed were gases that were found in the early Earth, in the primal atmosphere, in what we call the reducing atmosphere, which is a fancy chemical name for without oxygen, basically. At any rate, these things were cycled through a system, and there was a spark that went through the main chamber. Now, what do you suppose the spark was to represent?
Life?
Well, the lightning.
Oh, okay.
Lightning over an early atmosphere. And out of this system, there was supposed to have been certain special kinds of chemicals, we call them amino acids, that were to have been siphoned out of the whole system. And the scientists said, voila, we produced some amino acids in this system, so therefore life must have formed in this way in an early primitive atmosphere in what we call a primal soup. Well, there's a lot of problems with this. And the first one is what happens inside the cylinder itself, which is shown by this slide. Now, it's kind of a poor slide, but at any rate, inside the chamber, you have indeed the, and see if we can get back onto the slide over here. We have all of these things being shot through with electricity, and we have a small number of things, this represented by this arrow, a small number coming over to become amino acids. Looks like amino acids splashed on there at one time. But on the other side of it, we have this huge arrow going back to this more primitive state. Because the energy reaction in this system is hugely on the side of the more primitive and very small on the side of the amino acids. In fact, it takes an organic chemist with an apparatus such as we saw with Stanley Miller's apparatus to siphon out, to filter out the few amino acids that form. And they are very few, and the more simple ones.
Okay.
At any rate, we also have in this system things like cyanides forming and formaldehydes, things that would be not conducive to life at all, at least not in its original form. So therefore, we can say with no chance of being contradicted that this system would not produce life. There's also one more problem here, and that is that you need not only amino acids, which form eventually proteins. You put enough amino acids together, you get a chain of those, and you form a protein. But there are other kinds of molecules required for living things. We need nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, and those things, they can't form in this system. We have to form an entirely new bath to do that. So how did the two things get together ever? And then the most telling argument about the whole problem, I think, is the problem of the racemic molecules. And let's look at this next slide. The optical isomer problem. You notice that some of these molecules are right-handed and some are left-handed. Well, in living things, they're all left-handed, not right-handed. Well, let's answer the phone and see what we have here.
Alrighty. Well, why don't we wait just a second? I think they'll be on in a moment or two.
Okay. Well, in that case, we'll continue. This optical isomerism mitigates against life forming by accident because all the molecules of life are formed in this form, the left-handed form. In your hands, you have a right hand and a left hand. They're not identical. And It's the same with living molecules. When you form them in a test tube, you get even amounts of these and even amounts of these, 50-50. So how did this happen by accident? Absolutely impossible. That all of them should be of one hand or the other.
So the only way life could be created was from a creator.
Well, the only way it could have originated in my mind is that a creator, in fact, did put it together. You know, the old argument that wherever you have a clock maker is still true.
Okay.
It's still true to this day.
Now, would it matter to you as a creationist if, let's say, some very intelligent man happened to come up with some solution or something that was able to produce life in a test tube?
Not at all, Jeremy, because under those circumstances, what we would have taken is we would have found the most complex computers in the world.
Okay.
And we would have used the most complicated glassware in the world, and we would have applied the greatest minds in the world, and everybody operating on this problem would have worked in a concert of many, many fine labs and minds and experts working together on this to accomplish one thing, and that is to produce one little tiny bit of life.
Okay.
To my mind, that argues that a creator had to begin it in the first place.
Yeah.
And you know, there's another big problem with this whole issue of the origin of life. There's been an experiment that's been ongoing since the beginning of the food industry. You may not know this.
Okay.
But since the beginning of the food industry, when they first made the first canned pears or beets or canned meats,
Yeah.
there has been inside of those canned meats an absolutely rich broth with all the amino acids, all the DNAs, all the RNAs required to produce living things.
Okay.
And also there's been a ready source of energy coming through the can. And these things, some of them have been sitting around on shelves for the last 40 or 50 years.
And no sign of life?
Not in any one yet. And not only that, the food industry keeps turning out these things by the hundreds of billions, these cans.
Oh my.
And so you would expect if it's sheer chance and enough time would produce living things in a broth with energy coming into a system, you would expect that if there's one thing that would prove that life could form by chance processes, it would be the food industry. Sooner or later, there would be one can of food that would have some new living thing in it. And the fact that that never happens is the biggest argument against it. It's a tremendously huge experiment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, how about, Dennis, as a creationist, do you believe in the Big Bang Theory? Or
Boy, we're really going from one to the other this time.
yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I don't. And in fact, I know there are some creationists, and some of which have been highly visible in recent days, that do believe in the Big Bang. I'm one of those that think that the Big Bang is one of the most ridiculous ideas around. Number one is Robert Gentry's argument from the Paleo Halos. Number two is the issue of the gas laws.
Okay.
In any system where hydrogen is shot out into the universe,
Yeah.
obviously, we have stars, we have planets, we have all those things today in the universe.
Yeah.
And the Big Bang presupposes that all that went out, flying out from that original cosmic egg that exploded, was hydrogen. Hydrogen gas. In fact, they would say hydrogen is a tasteless, colorless gas that, given enough time, produces people. That's really what they say. But at any rate, it has to coalesce. It has to coalesce into stars. It has to coalesce into planetary systems. It has to become something solid. In fact, it has to even become heavier molecules, carbons and oxygens and things like this, so you have tremendous forces. And people say, well, that's no problem. Gravity takes care of that. That is not true. Gravity is the weakest force in the universe. Gravity becomes it reaches infinity if you look at the gravity equation, but it only reaches infinity as the distance between two objects approaches zero. Once they approach zero, then in the gravity equation, gravity goes to infinity. That's what happens in a black hole situation.
Okay, yeah.
But the problem is that until it reaches absolutely together, zero distance, that there is a pressure building up as these things begin to coalesce. And as they get closer and closer and closer together, there is more and more back pressure on the system.
Yeah.
Until, by the gas laws, there is a tremendously overwhelming pressure to get away.
Yeah.
In fact, the vectors become 50 times greater to go away than to coalesce at some point
Wow.
in the drive to come together. So no planet, no star could ever form from just hydrogen floating around in the galaxy someplace. It doesn't happen today. Oh, you see the occasional astronomer saying they're seeing stars forming. They have no evidence for this. They just are making assumptions based on some of their presuppositions, which are all evolutionary.
Oh my.
In fact, there's some real interesting things that we can look at from the universe, and I want to put another slide on the screen for that,
Okay.
if I might. Let's see, I wonder if I have, oh, here we go. I don't have it. I don't have it with me, I'm sorry. But one of the most interesting things about the solar system, and in this argument, is our comets, short period comets.
Okay.
A comet, as you may know, comes in from outside the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the big plate on which all the planets orbit.
All right.
There's a little bit of perturbation out in the outer reaches of the solar system where Pluto kind of goes in and out of the orbit of Neptune slightly. But most of the planets revolve in a plate fashion, except the comets, like Halley's Comet. They come in from outside the ecliptic on top of it, and they come down in a very sharp orbit, go very near the sun, and go back out into the dim reaches of space.
All right.
Now, as they come in, they begin to form a tail. It's only when they come closer and closer to the sun that they begin to form that tail. Excuse me. Now, as they get right near the sun, the tail is literally flashing far out into space. All that material is not fire. People think of a comet as having a fiery tail.
Yeah.
All it is reflected particles of mostly water and other gases going away from the comet's head.
Wow, then that's interesting.
Right, and so all that reflected stuff, do you think it comes back to the comet head? No.
No.
Every time it goes around, the comet loses a tremendous amount of volume.
Okay.
And if a comet comes as often as Halley's does, every 70 years, which seems like a long time to us,
Yeah.
but it's very short in periodicity in the solar system,
Okay.
what happens is that comet is deteriorating so fast that it can't possibly have existed for 4.5 billion years or 10 billion years, or however long they say the solar system existed. In fact, it would have a hard time existing for thousands of years. Even in our recent days, we saw one comet disintegrating and falling into Jupiter. Well, that's exactly what happens to the short period comets. They don't last long, and so therefore they can't possibly exist for very long. Well, they postulate, the evolutionist has to do something with this. This is a problem for them,
Yeah.
you understand.
Yeah.
So they postulate something they call Oort's cloud. Oort's cloud is a mass of comets supposedly outside the plate of the ecliptic, way out in space somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, these are huge bodies. We should detect them as gravitational perturbations on the outer planets. We ought, just like we did Pluto. That's how we discovered Pluto. It disturbed Neptune, and we
Okay.
saw it disturb Neptune.
Yeah.
We ought to see that, but there's no gravity perturbations on the outer reaches of the solar system that anybody's ever detected. And there's no way that we've ever detected anything out there in Oort's cloud. So Oort's cloud is a purely invented thing,
Just to make up for the
the evolutionist problem.
right.
Now, also, there's a big problem with the fact that suddenly, why in the world would suddenly, every now and then, one of them come shooting into the sun? If they're in a perfectly established orbit out there, you know, does the Earth every so often just decide to come shooting towards the sun? Something very drastic has to happen.
Yeah.
And it must happen on a very regular basis because there's a lot of short period comets.
Okay.
So this is the typical kind of thing that the evolutionist establishment does. And they will teach students such as yourself
Yeah.
all of this, and they will do this with great assurance, the way they present these things. And so students like myself and like yourself, and myself quite a bit longer ago than you, would believe these things without critically considering them. And yet, the evolutionist argument can be critically considered, and it's found wanting every time.
Okay. So the comets are really not supportive of anything evolutionary at all. It's
No.
just another supportive evidence for the creationists' young Earth idea.
Well, exactly. They
Or
see
a
that the evolutionists will always say to to the creationist, he will always say, when it comes to the age of the earth, he will always go, aha, we've got the creationist there.
Yeah.
But he doesn't.
Yeah, from the information
Because,
you've told.
We
Absolutely not.
we have ample evidence from many, many lines of dating, not just the radiometrics, which we can talk about another time, and in fact, they also demonstrate the truth of creationism. But, but there are many other lines of data that come in from other clocks in the universe that show us that the Earth was very young. And if the Earth is very young, then evolution doesn't stand a chance. And just by way of sort of rounding up here, I would like to look at a little bit of the dating, just real fast.
Okay.
Just one line of dating that really appeals to me. This is a schematic of a piece of uranium. Uranium 238 and 234 all produce many of these things, which are called alpha particles. This is part of the radiation that we talked about in the polonium-214. Okay. Now, these alpha particles spew out of all pieces of uranium constantly at a very known rate. And when they get out in the atmosphere, they pick up electrons and form an ordinary helium. Now, helium is one of the most inert substances known to man. That means it never combines with anything else in the universe. It just stays in the atmosphere. Some people thought early on that it out-pocketed into space. But we know now that actually there's more helium coming in than there is going out. So the net problem is even worse for the evolutionists.
Okay.
The amount of helium that is in the atmosphere can only be accounted for in about 10,000 or less years. That puts us right in the time frame for creationists, not for evolutionists.
Yeah.
So I would say, and by way of closing tonight, that the atmosphere is an absolute certainty that this Earth cannot be any older than what the Bible said, and the Bible said that it was about 6,000 years old.
All right. Thank you, Dennis.